Today we're going to talk a little bit about genetics and production management, some of the work we're doing here. Appointment here, 70% extension, 30% research. Been here 10 years this summer, which is a little bit hard to believe. Time flies when you're having fun. Here are some of the areas we're working on. On the applied side, we're looking at what we term piglet nutrient access, consisting of at the piglet level, piglet vitality, piglet birth weight. At the sow level, colostrum yield, milk yield, number of functional teats. Largest part of our program here, my program here, is sow condition and gestation management. We'll talk about some today. And then here at North Carolina State, we have the ability to have genetic selection research lines. We've had 3 lines over the years. We currently have 2 lines going right now. One of the only places in the world that has this type of capability, and we'll be talking a little bit about those today. Outline for today's talk, we're going to talk about some production tools you could potentially use within your production system. Again, piglet nutrient access, long-term genetic selection research lines, and then over the past several years, I think we've put together quite a few national hog farmer articles, which some of you may have read. Some of you might not be as familiar with this information delivery. And so I've highlighted a few articles that might be worth your time to circle back and read or reread. So as feed prices creep up, $7, $8 corn, pig weight is a factor, because of course we know as pigs get heavier, feed conversion is going to worsen. Now the solution we're going to talk about here today is quite simple, and hopefully the work that Dr. Holt is working on, nobody's been really seemed to master the tool that can automatically weigh pigs easily in a barn without using a scale, and hopefully Dr. Holt's research is what gets us there. In the meantime, we've got a quick and easy tool that might be worth some people's time if they're having to implement challenges getting the right pigs out of the barn. So if you don't have a scale, heart girth, the circumference there shown is highly correlated with weight. Here, this is about 200-300 commercial pigs out in the industry. We went out and measured using a heart girth tape. On the side axis is scale weight, bottom axis is heart girth tube in inches, and the correlation is very high, about 0.93 in this study. Correlation is going to range from -1 to 1, with a correlation of 1 being the same trait. So heart girth is a very good representative of live weight. So using a heart girth tape, if you've ever used that, is quite challenging. So we came up with the idea of using a heart girth tube, just a piece of plastic tubing. You can get it like Lowe's or Home Depot. If you talk to Wayne Cast, he's also had the idea of using like a wire of a certain gauge, something that has some rigidity but enough flexibility that it fits around the pig. So we have here's the link here for the YouTube video on making a heart girth tube. It has 56,000 views, but I'm not sure how many of these are production people. We have heard of the heart girth tube being used on sow farms to measure gilts. We've heard some of that activity in Canada and here in North Carolina, but I'm not sure how much traction it's gained on the finishing side. So today we're going to look at ways you potentially could implement it. Here's the equation we came up with from that 200 or 300 pigs, heart girth circumference, and the weights they represent. If you look at this equation, you plot it over top of the Kansas State equation. Both equations are very similar, so hopefully they're both fairly accurate. So this heart girth tube, it's a $2 piece of plastic tubing. You may be sitting there, well, this is not very impressive, and you're right. I mean, $2 piece of tubing. But as far as its potential, I wouldn't be surprised if some people, we got some smart people in this industry, if somebody could turn this $2 piece of tubing into $1 million within their production system. So where the heart girth tube works best is when pens are full. When the pens are full, the pigs are going to be pressed up against the alleyway. You're going to have easy access to measuring pigs from the alleyway. So our research technician out at Tidewater, Lee Tyre, he actually figured out that when using the heart girth tube, it's easier not to get in the pen. It's easier if you can measure that pig standing in the aisle. And this kind of makes sense because usually pigs in the finishing barn are going to be used to you standing in the aisle. maybe not as familiar with you standing in the pen. So it actually, to use the tube, it works best to stand in the aisle and lean over the gate, hence why it works best when pens are full. So, and I'm not going to sit here and say you go out and measure every pig. I don't think we're going to do that. I do think when the barns are full, you can go in and measure guide pigs. So if you cut your tube to a specific weight, say your threshold market weight is 270 pounds, within each pen, you could potentially measure a few guide pigs and then use those guide pigs to mark the rest of the pigs in the pen. Because pretty much you can take anybody off the street and they can tell if one pig is bigger than another. But to come in and pick out a threshold target weight, that can be a little more challenging. The sow caliper, this has been by far our biggest program here. We're on version 3 of the sow caliper. Version 1.0 sow caliper, you can see in the upper left-hand corner, a little yellow arrow is pointing to the dial there. We don't make version 1.0 anymore because, as we've found in some production systems, drop the sow caliper, and if you drop it on that dial, it potentially bends a little bit, which changes your measurement. So we changed that in version 2. So version 2 looks a lot like version 1. The dial is thicker. We took some of the numbers off to make it a little bit lighter weight. And then down in some of the South American countries, we were getting photos back, and they weren't even using the handles that we provided on the sow caliper. So we said, well, if you're not going to use the handles, we're going to cut the handles off. And so we cut the handles off for the version 3.0 caliper. It's lighter weight. It takes less material and labor to make. And so it's a less expensive version. And I think if you learn how to use it, it's just as effective or more effective than the other versions. So if you're going to measure a few sows within your herd, just to validate what you're doing is correct, I think either the version 2.0 or the version 3.0 sow caliper are just fine. If you're going to be measuring a lot of sows within your herd, you're going to want to get the 30-inch extension and probably put it on the sow caliper 3.0. So out in the Midwest, we'd seen some pictures back that for the version 2.0 caliper, people had 2 handles, and they're using 2 handles to put that caliper on the sow to save them from bending over and help them probably get a little bit better last rib placement, probably save some labor. So in working with Jerry Purvis at Purvis Farms here in North Carolina, him and his maintenance guy, Michael Priest, came up with the idea for a 30-inch extension. And so this was really, I think, going to be a big change for what we do going forward. Because the 30-inch extension, you don't have to bend over the sows. You can save your back. You can go faster. You can go faster through a group of sows with the 30-inch extension. And then I think for really the first time, it starts to make sense where you can actually measure sows in a pen. I wasn't sure we'd ever see that with a sow caliper, but using that 30-inch extension, it creates enough buffer between you and the sow that you're not getting into her flight zone that you can measure sows within a pen. And then we also had some help from Dave Majeski in modifying, we had helped modify the design to put that 30-inch extension on the sow caliper. So it was really a team effort in developing this 30-inch extension, and it really just shows you the power of scientists working with the industry to develop solutions for the benefit of everyone. The sow caliper, it's been implemented in 38 countries worldwide. And this has been all word of mouth. We've spent $0 on advertising. And so I think it tells you a little bit potentially about how it's working across the globe. The concept, it measures an angle, not width. And so if you look over to the diagram to the right there, you see as an animal adds, and this goes across species of animals, whether it be cattle, your dog, or whatnot. As an animal adds weight, fat, and muscle, the angle of that top line changes. And so that's simply what the sow caliper measures, is that top line. So there on the left, you see an example of a very angular sow, or a sow that's very lean and doesn't have a lot of muscle. And on the right, you see a sow that's very fat or relatively fat and has quite a bit of muscle, over conditioned, is heavier. So we've got the sow caliper on quite a few farms, and now it's time to make sure we're implementing it correctly. So you got to find the last rib. And it seems pretty intuitive to a lot, but not as easy for some. Find the last rib on that sow for your caliper placement. Again, you're measuring an angle, not width. And so you need to get the middle of that sow caliper on the backbone so you can properly measure that angle. So find the last rib, get the middle of the sow caliper on the backbone, and then you should be able to get your measurement. Here is some work we've done in collaboration with Purvis Farms and PIC. This was done a couple of years ago, essentially validating the NRC for sow gestation requirements. And we found the model was fit pretty well. What PIC was also able to develop out of this is to develop feeding guidelines, and then for each your thin, ideal, and fat sows. And the feeding guidelines were not too far off from what we were suggesting, but it was good to help validate it nonetheless. And so if you got a fat sow coming out of lactation, you can probably set her in about 3.5 pounds throughout gestation, and she's going to maintain body condition at about 3.5 pounds. Ideal sow, you can set her about 4 pounds. This is, keep in mind, this is based on a corn soy diet. Set her about 4 pounds, and that's going to kind of keep her in condition throughout gestation. And then if you have a thin sow, you know, you can look at different strategies, whether you want to feed 5.5 or 6 pounds, get her up to ideal condition, and then back off the feed a little bit. So out here in North Carolina, you know, we're probably going to measure those sows maybe every 30 days. But as you move towards these electronic sow feeding systems, I think you can potentially measure those sows at weaning. Once you get your feeding curve set, you may not need to measure her again throughout gestation once you get that feeding level dialed in for what it takes to maintain body condition. So we get a lot of questions on the sow caliper. Does it fit my genetics? That's a very common question. And the answer is, as far as we know, yes. So, and actually that's a twofold question. So does the sow caliper work on my genetics? The answer is automatically yes, because the sow caliper measures weight, fat, and muscle. Now the second question is, okay, is your suggested scoring system correct for my particular genetic line or farm? As far as we know, yes, but I have not seen data to suggest otherwise, but it is possible. It is possible that your sows need to run a little thinner or a little fatter than what we've shown here. So what we have here is 3 studies, 2 conducted at NC State. These are each about 1,000 sows each. These were conducted with different genetics, different feeding programs, different facilities. And we came up with a relatively same answer for the ideal sow body condition in relation to reproductive performance. The data on the bottom comes from Columbia Asymmetrics. This is about 16,000 sows. And again, they found the same ideal sow body condition in relation to reproductive performance. So here's some Knauer, some common questions on the caliper. And I'll just put these up here for a little bit. You guys can go back and read through them if you want. Does it work on different genetics? Yes, as far as we know. Does it work on gilts? Yes, but there's some details behind that, but it's not really going to change how you implement it much. You're probably going to have, you know, probably 2 feeding levels for gilts, and maybe even 1. You know, you may be able to put all your gilts on a 4 pounds corn soy diet and let them roll, because you're probably not going to dip below that for fat gilts. That's probably about what you're going to feed ideal gilts. And if you have some thin gilts, well, yeah, you might give them some more. So you can read through those questions more if you'd like. I guess it's 3 years old now, but we put together a video on evaluating replacement gilts for feet and leg soundness. I think there's some good tools out there that show some good still images, but we wanted to take a video and combine still images and video and put them into one training tool. And so what we do throughout this video is, in the stills, we outline or draw in the very angles of what we're looking at. And so if you're talking to somebody and you say, okay, angle of the front knee, well, they may not know what you're talking about, but within this training video, we outline the angle of the front knee and what it should look like. So it's 11-minute video. Whether you're training people on the sow farm or your gilt selection crew, I think it's definitely worth your time to check out. And again, that's available through our YouTube page. Now moving into piglet nutrient access. Again, we talked about the different pieces. This is a concept we kind of proposed last year. Thanks National Hog Farmer for coming up with a much better image than what I originally had. We've done a lot of studies in this area. A lot have been more pilot type studies, 70, 80 sows at our Tidewater Research Station. Been a huge asset to work with. And then you can see the other people we've collaborated with. These have been much larger type studies within the production systems and have produced probably more robust results as well. So Piglet Vitality, I think that's the area we're headed down right now. We got a large Piglet Vitality study we just started yesterday. We got another one we'd like to get scheduled this summer. I think, in my opinion, I think it's going to be possible to feed these sows pre-farrow and reduce stillborns and potentially reduce the need for farrowing assistance. So if you look at some of the data that Trey Kellner and AMVC have put together based on some of the European data, feeding multiple times pre-farrow, I mean, that looks very promising for reducing stillborns. I think that's some good stuff. But can we get to feeding them once per day and do just as good or better than that? I think we may be able to. So even though we got some good solutions right now, there could be some good or even better solutions coming down the pipeline. Smithfield Premium Genetics, we've done several large-scale studies with them. A lot of my master's students have worked with them. That's been a great working relationship with Kent Gray and his team down there. Just been an excellent training ground to train students. Students get real-world experience using real-world data, solving real-world problems. So our collaboration with the Smithfield Premium Genetics team has just been very valuable to us here at NC State. And we've worked on a number of projects with them there. We also had a large-scale bump feeding study in gilts. We thought it was the largest one in the world, but then we found out that one in South America that year was bigger. But that was also conducted with Smithfield. And the results of that trial are available in James Quick's video on YouTube that was posted today. And then we had we did several colostrum studies, a nice big one with Prestige. Those are not easy to do. And again, we thank all the cooperating collaborators for their partnerships in these conducting these research studies. Obviously, within the university, we don't have the type of numbers we need to get a lot of statistical power, and we rely on these partnerships to create data that's meaningful for these production systems. So to summarize kind of our findings in relation to the piglet nutrient access, birth weight, if you look at the literature, you look at our data, hard to improve through nutrition. There's genetic solutions coming down the pipeline as we speak. Colostrum yield, hard to measure, hard to improve. And I say through nutrition, but mainly I mean energy and amino acids. It seems like changing the level of energy and amino acids does not have a large impact on colostrum yield, unless maybe those sows were underfed at some point in gestation. Functional teats, we've always known it's been important, but I think some of the large data sets we've put together in the last several years really shines a light on the exact economic value of what an additional functional teat is worth. So we've consistently found an increase in one functional teat increases pigs weaned by about 0.3 per year. So if you start adding that up, if sow produces 3 litters, that's another pig in her lifetime just due to having another functional teat. So if you value your functional teats or your weaned pigs at $20 per weaned pig, another functional teat per gilt would be worth $20 in the initial cost, or value, I should say, of that gilt. More recently, we've been looking at substandard teats that it can be identified pre-farrow, and this is largely based on size. And as Zach, he also has a video there on YouTube of some recent work he's been working on, has shown that we can identify substandard teats pre-farrow, and we can potentially incorporate these substandard teats and grade them accordingly based on some of our genetic evaluations. Genetics of sow throughput, I think we had a nice article we put out last year kind of outlining how to improve the genetics of sow throughput, and a lot of that data and research came in collaboration with Smithfield Premium Genetics. Long-term genetic selection research, this is made possible out at our Tidewater Research Station. We have a great crew of guys out there They work hard every day making sure these selection lines continue. Here are the selection lines we've had in the last, well, since 2012. We started an age of puberty line. We have a young line and an old line. We selected for what we call our fiber lines for several years. We had the trait of interest was lean growth. We had one genetic line selected on high fiber, which consisted of 45% hulls, mids, and distillers. And we had one genetic line selected on low fiber, corn soy diet. And then more recently, we've started a selection line for number of functional teats. So this is a slide I actually pulled out of a presentation I gave as a PhD student 12 years ago at Midwest, showing the benefits of age of puberty. So when you start to add them up, age of puberty can reduce generation interval. In 2 studies, it's been shown to reduce seasonal infertility. We hope to further validate that starting this fall. It reduces mature sow size, increases intensity of selection. As the gilts you keep, a higher percentage of them are going to farrow. So it increases pigs per mated per year, increases sow longevity. Of course, reproduction is the largest reason sows leave the herd. And age at puberty has consistently been shown to improve gilt retention, sow retention, and also has enhanced estrus behavior. So when you put all these economic benefits together, I'm not convinced, I should say in my opinion, I'm not convinced that we have the proper economic value for age at puberty. Garrett C. has a presentation also on the YouTube of the grad student presentations. Here's the work he did here as a master's student. And so what this shows is genetic trends for correlated traits to age of puberty over the first 4 generations of selection. So the 2 points I'm going to highlight here is improvement in age of puberty, of course, that's the trait under selection. We improved about a half standard deviation. What's interesting is the percentage of gilts that reach puberty by 220 days of age. We improved that more so than we did reducing age of puberty. So essentially, we improved retention. We just improved retention more so than actually reducing age of puberty, although we did reduce age of puberty as well. Selection on high fiber diet. We did this for 3 generations, and we only did it for 3 generations because we managed to mess up the pigs after just 3 generations. So this is some of Jake's data we did, a 2x2 factorial genetic line across the top, and then diet, either the corn soy or the high fiber. And when the genetic lines were both fed corn soy, we see a 1% reduction in yield in the high fiber fed pigs. And when the genetic lines were both fed high fiber, we see 0.8% reduction in yield in the high fiber pigs. And so genetic line was significantly different. And so the nice thing about this data is it fit with our eyeball test. So out in the barn, it looked like these pigs selected on high fiber were very lean over top, but their bellies were just huge. And so apparently gut fill has a relatively high heritability because we were able to change yield grade in just 3 short generations. So what's this mean? Even though we didn't have success, I think we might circle back to selecting on high fiber diets again with a different trait of interest. But if you're in a genetic nucleus, you better be careful of not pumping too much fiber into your diets of the genetic nucleus, or you could potentially mess up yield in a hurry. Here are some selected National Hog Farmer articles that we've written over the past several years. I think there's some good pieces in here. There's some reviews of different literature pieces. We got one in there about tail biting. A lot on the gilt development piece, and of course a lot on the sow piece. And I think if you wade through some of these titles, you could see some that would provide benefit to what you're doing. I actually had a person in the industry contact me just last night, and I sent him one of these articles to help with some of the issues he was facing right now. So with that, thank you all for your time.